Welcome back to Our Diplomacy, your trusted podcast in international relations and geopolitics. My name is Fabio Almada, and I think today's episode will be really insightful. I think this is a phenomenon that touches every country in the world. So, really looking forward for today.
Today's episode will focus on the far right and the recent rise of culture wars. But before we get into the most recent developments, let's get into history to have some context here. So, after the end of the Second World War, we said never again and pledged to adhere to human rights and the equality of mankind. Fascist far right ideology were allegedly defeated, but the remnants of this ideology have found their way back into Western and global politics, threatening to undermine the identity of the liberal Western order. This is visible today, not only when we consider the recent success of far-right parties in the West and beyond, but also when we look at rhetorics and policy. Provisions surrounding equality and human rights, which we have taken for granted, are contested political issues again. Among the victims of this far-right rise are members of the LGBTIQ community, that have seen both growing acceptance and exclusion in recent years, depending on factors like geography and ruling parties, is one of many clashes between the new right and mainstream politics, and we use the term culture wars to refer to this development, as we are witnessing a conflict between social groups and the struggle for dominance of their values, beliefs, and practices. And today, we would like to address this crisis of liberalism.
And for today's episode, we've invited Yannick Shetty. He's a member of the Austrian Parliament since 2019. He works on youth politics, migrant integration, and LGBTIQ plus rights. He's one of the youngest members of Parliament of Austria, and he has a lot of reach with more than 50,000 followers and more than 1.5 million likes on TikTok alone. So welcome, Yannick, to Our Diplomacy. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, thanks, and thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to the next hour. I don't know how long it actually will take, but discussing the very important issues you have already raised.
Thank you, Yannick. And today's episode will be structured into 3 blocks. So at first, we will take a look at Europe and analyze the role of the far right on the continent, consider how it has impacted the rights of LGBTIQ communities. Then, in the second block, we will examine the far right in the United States and analyze the consequences of the US-American culture war that is currently being waged and how it affects minorities in the US. And in the third chapter, we will take a brief look at the influence of religious organizations and how they influence foreign policy, especially African politics, such as Uganda, where homosexuals are threatened with death penalties.
Well, guys, we're going to start with this first blog, and I think we're going to focus a little bit more on European politics. And it's no mystery that far-right political parties have played a backstage role in the past, but until 2015, when the so-called migration crisis hit Europe, it allowed many populist parties to gain a lot of momentum and fuel their campaigns with a lot of nationalism, with anger, and that sense of loss of control of the trajectory of each of the countries' culture, right? So we see a lot of success in the far-right in countries such as Poland, in Brexit as well, with the election of populist right governments as well in Austria, in Italy, and Hungary as well, with the re-election of Orban in 2018. So there can be many ways and many reasons for this. Maybe the economic crisis 2019 really angered and antagonized the industrial working class, which used to be traditionally supporting classic left-wing parties. So, Yannick, I would like to ask you a little bit of this. How do you think this far-right populism and discourse is affecting politics here in the continent?
Yeah, unfortunately, to a large amount. So, like speaking of Orban, for example, and having a view on Hungary, they always need someone to blame for the problems they have in their countries, right? So, first it was Soros, the philanthropists, so the Jews. Then it was the migrants after the 2015 migrant crisis, and nowadays in the past 2 to 3 years is the LGBTIQ community, and they're doing this learning from the US, learning from Trump and the influencers, the far right influencers there. So we have in Europe the developments always 2 to 3 years after the United States, and this is very unfortunate. And we see this not only in Hungary, we also see it in Italy, we see it in Austria, in Germany, where far right parties are copy pasting what is successful in countries such as Poland, such as Hungary. Yeah, in the LGBTIQ community, we see the first time in Austria in the past decades that there is the first time a rise in hate crimes against the LGBTIQ people, parts of the community, and yeah, this is concerning me very much.
And you have also recently thematized on your social media channels that in Poland there are so-called LGBTQ-free zones. So could you maybe elaborate on that development?
Yeah, I mean, this is really crazy, right? Because the European Union was always meant to be a freedom zone, a zone where a union where the dignity of each human being is holy, right? And it is really crazy to see that the Polish government, or not the Polish government, but specific regions in Poland, they were creating so-called LGBT-free zones. So zones where there are no LGBT people, which is of course bullshit, because we all know it's not a matter of politics if you're LGBTIQ, so if you're gay or lesbian or transgender. So everywhere in the world there's the same amount of LGBT people. Maybe in cities or in urban regions you have a higher density because people move there because it's more liberal. But of course, this is not an issue of politicians to say we are an LGBT-free zone. And of course, this for the people of the community living in these regions, this is a terrible issue, because the far right groups and extremist parts in society, they were entitled by these LGBT-free zones to do hate crimes, to be offensive against people. And yeah, this is a really bad development, but it's nice to see that in the meantime, in some of these regions in Poland, progressive parties came to power and removed the ruling PiS party, and these LGBT-free zones were again removed. And I think this is a really a good development in some parts of Poland. And in addition to that, I think it's very important that the Commission and also the Parliament has a very clear opinion on this. And yeah, at the moment, not speaking of Poland, but regarding Hungary, there's how you say, Vertragsverletzungsverfahren. I don't know the English term right now, but there's a prosecution of the Hungarian government because of their policies amongst minorities. In Austria, of course, we have a conservative party and we have a strong influence of the Catholic Church, and they were blocking a lot of progression in the last years and decades. But in the end, we had progress over the last years, right? So year for year, it got better. And for the first time, we, as already mentioned, we see a rise in hate crimes. And the first time this year and beginning last year, maybe slightly, we have with our far-right party, the Freedom Party, a major political party offensively campaigning against the LGBTIQ community. In the end, it's very simple. As also already mentioned, a few folks of the Freedom Party, they went to the US, they visited their think tank, they posted it on Facebook so everybody can read about it. I think it was 1 or 2 months ago. And they learned there, hey, if you connect anti-trans policies with the protection of kids, then it will work. And this is actually what they are doing now, up and down. They have protests, they do campaigns against the transgender issues. I'm not really sure if it works for them from a strategical point of view, but they're doing it now really hardcore. And this is very new for Austrian politics because, of course, we had issues about gay marriage and adoption rights and so on. But it was not such a polarized issue, and the Freedom Party made it to such an issue with their campaigns.
In Austria, there are also things that you are dealing with in the parliament. You have mentioned in the past months is the issue of conversion therapies. So what is this and why is this not banned yet?
The conversion therapy is actually, if I talk to guys in my age, they actually don't believe it's still legal in Austria. So these are institutions, individuals, therapists, medical, actually wouldn't call them professionists, but Actually, they are. And they are trying to convince parents, teenagers, that their sexual orientation can be cured, so that they can change it from their homosexual orientation to a heterosexual orientation. And of course, we know, I don't have to elaborate it, this is not possible, and this does not work, and is for the individuals going through these conversion therapies, awful experience. I personally also met a couple of guys who was in this therapies like 10, 20 years ago, and it's still legal in Austria. And we advocate for a ban of these conversion therapies, because we think it shouldn't be legal that young people have to go through these methods.
I'm not that familiarized with Austrian politics, so all my knowledge from Austria comes from Euramis, the trip that we made together last summer. And to me, this sounds really particular. Like I was not aware of all of this. And I know that Yannick Aramis was telling me that you've done a lot of work these past years to push for positive laws and processes, such as allowing homosexuals to donate blood. And the things you just said discussing conversion therapy. So, I mean, it's to me originally coming from Latin America, more traditional, more Catholic place. It sounds sometimes different that in Europe things are like that. But it's amazing to see young people up there in political places, in parliaments, pushing for this agenda. So that must be really interesting. And I don't know if you have any like personal story. How is it for a young professional to be up there trying to change these traditional viewpoints in those level of government?
That's a good question, and actually, it's often frustrating, right? Because the reality of me, of you, of our generation is a completely different one compared to these guys sitting in parliament for the last 20, 30 years. I mean, there are parliamentarians, colleagues of mine in the Austrian National Council. They are longer in parliament than I'm alive. And of course, they have a very different mindset and a very different view on things, on realities of young people, or also of realities of the LGBT community. So when they came into their position, there was actually LGBT wasn't even an acronym known in politics. It was a non-issue, right? And now, of course, the different minorities, they advocate for their rights, for their human rights. And this is often very frustrating for me, for other young colleagues, because we have the feeling that they don't even understand what we are talking about. It's such a different reality they are living in. Actually, yeah, I would say it's often frustrating, but we still keep on pushing. And from now on, then there's also a possibility to make a change. You mentioned the ban for homosexuals, for homo and bisexual men donating blood, which is just not evidence-based. We were pushing this agenda for 2 or 3 years, and finally this ban was removed, and it's now a matter of your individual sexual behavior. So if you have lots of different sexual partners, then you are banned from donating blood, which is logical and makes sense. And it's not an issue of your sexual orientation. I think that's good. So it is from now and then possible to make a change, but often it's really frustrating.
So oftentimes these matters of protecting minorities are not something that is where process is getting forward because of political decisions, but due to judicial developments, because actually we have a constitution that everyone is supposed to be equal, and if the politics do not live up to that, then this will be adapted, of course. So what were the recent developments in Europe and in Austria in this regard?
Yeah, I actually think it's a very problematic development. Nevertheless, I'm happy that the Austrian Constitutional Court ruled that the ban of same-sex couples from the marriage is against the constitution. I'm of course happy about that, because this opened the marriage for all. But I'm not really happy about the development that constitutional courts are making these decisions, because it is the responsibility of the legislators to do these decisions. In fact, these are political decisions, and these decisions should be made by the legislators, by elected representatives, and not by courts. because I strongly believe that you can gain more acceptance in the society if who are elected to make the decisions also then make the decisions, and not other institutions often for the society, for the electorate, it's not that transparent how these decisions are made. On the other hand, we also have then countries such as Hungary, such as Poland, where the constitutional courts are appointed politically. I think you might have covered this already in your podcast or talked about this, but this is also a huge problem. So I think it is not only a good development that these decisions are shifted away from politics to the constitutional courts. Yeah, and in Austria, the recent developments, actually, we don't have a lot of recent developments in LGBT issues, because on the legislative level, there is almost no discrimination left. Of course, we have we need a new law for banning conversion therapies, but from the existing laws and the existing legislation, there is not much discrimination left, because the constitutional court removed in the past years almost every single discrimination in the laws. What is needed in Austria is campaigns in the police, in the educational system against hate crime. So it's not on a legislational level, but on a campaigning level, if you want to say so. And this is what we are advocating for.
It's true that the future of political development sometimes, as Aramis said, comes from across the Atlantic. So maybe in this second block, we can talk a little bit, discuss about how things are going over there. And Aramis, so why don't you let us know a little bit about the culture war element there in the States?
So as we know, the culture war in the US, concepts like wokeism suddenly dominate the public discourses, and the far right claims that they need to stop liberal ideologies that allegedly gotten out of hand. And very recently, the far right has decided to go against the LGBTQ plus community specifically. And our colleague Andrew Garthrope from the podcast America Explained the reason for such developments, that suddenly you have this policy shift.
I think that one thing that often seems to me is that the right wing in America, kind of the conservative media complex, has fantastic message discipline. Like, they pick a topic that they are going to make the topic of the month or of the year, and then they just all turn their attention to doing that. And I mean, we saw that with critical race theory, which is, was for a year or so kind of the designated bogeyman. And then we've seen this relentless focus on trans issues. And I really do think that right now we're living through one of the most intense anti-LGBT episodes in American history.
Well, Aramis, I think that is a really interesting audio, and I think it really reflects these trends that we've seen in the U.S. and not just about, LGBTQ plus community. We've seen how it's not just about the rhetorics. I would say the legal rights of many members of the community have been heavily restricted in some states. The rhetoric is there, and the legislation attacks are there as well. We've seen the abortion rights are being restricted as well. So, Yannick, I would like to ask you about it. How do you see the situation in the States regarding these liberties and this restriction of freedoms?
I think the debate in the US and also in parts of the United Kingdom has gotten really crazy. Elections are decided over topics such as trans rights or women's rights, such as abortion, gay rights. Not that I'm spokesperson for LGBT issues. I think it's very important, but it's concerning a very small minority of the society, a small minority of the society. And these are the issues most relevant in elections, not inflation, not like global issues. It is so crazy that the major debate is on such minority issues. And I strongly believe that it also has to do with the LGBT community and the progression and the movement on the one side, because I strongly believe in such a polarized world we are living in, every movement, every strong and relevant movement in the media is creating a counter movement. And you can see this in the US. And I think it is very disturbing to see how the debate in the US and in the United Kingdom is at the moment, because it's not about like the major issues across society, for the whole society relevant. It's very specific minority issues. It is very easy to debate on these issues. Of course, debating on inflation or in macroeconomics is far harder than having an opinion on abortion or on gay rights. Very easy to understand, right? I think there's also a reason why it became so relevant in the media and in the general election. And if you also see like the video, the clip Joe Biden released a couple of days ago, launching his candidacy and for his re-election, it is mostly about these super polarized issues. I think this is very disturbing because it will create even more polarization in the society. And I really don't want to have this in Austria. I want to discuss about LGBT issues. Of course, I want to discuss them. I think it's important to discuss about minority issues. But should it be the number one issue discussing in a presidential election from the one and from the other side? I don't think so. That's why I really hope that we won't have the same development in Austria and in Europe. But as you and as I also already mentioned before, Europe is always 2 to 3, 4 years behind the US, and I really fear this discussion because I think it will tear our society even more apart.
In this context, a really decisive factor, or something that could turn out to be a really decisive factor, are young people, because what we have seen during the US midterm elections is that a lot of young people were mobilized because they saw the radicalization of the Republican Party in the US, and then swaths of them voted in favor of the Democrats, and the Republicans had to turn back their policy, go down with their tone. And now when it comes to abortion, it's not as radical as it used to be before the midterm elections, because they have seen these developments and reacted to them. So perhaps again, during these presidential elections, we see that Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump, they fully try to exploit those issues. Maybe it will turn out that they will fail again, and then we don't see such developments in Europe. But on the other hand, this election is, of course, very decisive. If DeSantis or Trump wins, then it may have serious implications for Europe. So if this was the case, and if we see that this culture wave is affecting Europe again, Yannick, what can the LGBTQ community do to defend itself?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question because, of course, we shouldn't stop advocating for our rights, right? So these are human rights we are talking about. On the other side, as I already mentioned before, if we get louder and if we react to these statements, to these campaigns coming from the far right, it is kind of creating a vicious circle. So it's a dilemma, kind of, because if we are not talking about it, we are giving all the stage to the far right. And if we're talking about it, if we arguing with them, this vicious circle is continuing. But I still believe I strongly believe, actually, we have to answer this question. We can't give an easy answer to this question. How should we react? How should we answer these questions raised? It has always to depend on the specific issue. I give you a concrete example. In Vienna, the far-right party, the Freedom Party, is campaigning against drag readings to kids. So this is really a micro issue. I mean, how many drag queens are there? Drag is actually not an issue for the LGBTIQ community because it's more of acting, right? It's not about sexual orientation or gender identity. It is show. It is entertainment. Okay, but they try to connect drag with sexual orientation and with gender identity. And they started a campaign that the mayor of Vienna should ban readings to children by drag queens. So I think there are 2 or 3 events. It's such a micro topic. And concerning this campaign, I think it would be the best for us as community just ignoring it, because they are trying to making an issue. They are trying to get this polarization, to get this debate, and they were successful because it was a non-issue and they made it to an issue. So I think we should answer this question depending on the issue raised, and if it's about human rights, if it's about really fundamental issues, then of course we always have to defend our rights, and we always have to be careful that there is not a backlash, but we have also to be careful what they are talking about. And sometimes it is exactly what they want, that we are reacting aggressive as they do, because then they have the platform they need.
Absolutely. And it's so fascinating that this scheme of the far right is still working so well, even though we all know it. At first, they claim something, they create arousement, they have some scandal, everyone talks about it. And then they tune their tone down, they say, okay, yeah, we didn't mean it that way. But in the end, everyone's discussing about their issues. They bring their stuff on the agenda. And it's hard to cope with that, even though, as I said, the agenda is very clear.
Honestly, I think so far this has been such an insightful conversation. Honestly, I did my research on that, but Yannick, you made me think about a couple of things that were honestly not in my mind, and I'm sure the listeners will be really thankful. So yeah, like I think Aramis and I will go more into detail in this third block when we'll talk about the elephant in the room, which is the influence of religion in politics. But so far, thank you so much for your insight into Austrian politics, European politics, and all this fight for LGBTQ, the community, their rights, and the fight against the far right. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Yannick. Thank you for taking your time. We highly appreciate it. And we wish you the best of luck for defending LGBTQ rights in the Austrian Parliament and beyond.
I will need it. And thank you so much for inviting me, and especially thanks to you for covering this issue. I think it's very important to not only discuss it in headlines and in 1 to 3 minute clips like we do it on TikTok. It is important to discuss this very difficult topic where it's not always black and white. There's a lot of gray shadow in between, right? That you take your time for discussing this in a whole podcast episode. I think that's really important, and it was a pleasure joining you.
In this episode, we addressed the role of Europe, we addressed the role of the US, and we addressed the role of the far right. But in order to gain a fuller picture, to grasp the issue fully, we also need to have a more international look. And we also need to take the role of religious groups into account. And this is what we would like to do in this final third block. So, Fabio, could you please elaborate on that issue? How powerful are religious groups, and what is the role of religion in global politics?
Yes, Aramis, I think that is a great element to add into our analysis, because although that secularism has rapidly increased in so many parts of the country, in so many societies, religion still plays quite an important role in politics for so many reasons, right? One of them that comes just to my head is how religions often make strong claims about people's alliance, right? So they claim for these universal claims where everyone should follow, right? One example is Islam, and how traditionally it holds that everyone owes obedience to Allah's will. And then sometimes these religious commitments, they clash with the demands of the society, political demands, freedom rights. So we can clearly see here a pattern of why sometimes far-right politics and the people that follow these ideologies, there's also this religious component there. It's the same with LGBTQ plus rights, right? Throughout history, we've seen how religion has inspired a multitude of world events, and these range from everything from horrific terrorist attacks to altruistic responses to refugee crisis and humanitarian crisis, right? So that is something that we have to say as well. But just to give you maybe a couple of examples, I think really interesting is the case of evangelists in the US and Brazil. And evangelicals, it's just this broad umbrella concept that encompasses different Protestant dominations that share different core interests. It's no mystery that just as the military helped Bolsonaro to rise to power, evangelicals also played an important role in there as well for him to secure the presidency. And then he gave back some political concessions to these communities by giving someone from this community a seat in the Supreme Court of Justice. And we have seen how evangelical communities in Brazil have a lot of influence in Brazil's crucial institutions and ministries. So that is just the case there. Then we see a similar trend in the US. White evangelical voters were central to Trump's first election, and he still remains overwhelmingly popular among them. So throughout the years, we can see how many of the political agendas that these politicians put in legislation have to deal a lot with these culture wars and the concessions that can appeal to these communities, right? So it is true that in some case, conservative evangelical politics expand this shift towards the right. And that clashes with a lot of the things that more liberal and more young audiences might like. We've seen all of the protests against abortion rights in the US. So those are some of the things that we've seen in the last years.
Yeah, you addressed the role of evangelical movements and especially their role in national politics. It's evangelical movements in the US affecting Donald Trump and DeSantis, and in Brazil affecting former President Bolsonaro. But also another aspect that I think is really interesting, and where you have also prepared some information on that, Fabio, is that these movements don't just remain in the national boundaries, but they affect politics globally, and especially in Africa.
Yeah, Aramis, and that is something that I was really surprised when I saw. I mean, we've discussed that with Yannick, how maybe political developments in the US affect the way things and the rhetoric happen here in Europe. I was just not so sure about how sometimes lobbies and these political associations, they finance agendas, anti-gay, anti-non-binary agendas in other regions. And this is also the case in Africa. Last month, the Ugandan parliament passed one of the toughest pieces of anti-gay legislation in the continent, where it pretty much puts the possibility of life in prison to those people that identify themselves as gay. And there's the death penalty element in certain cases. It's also the case in Ghana, where there's this extreme anti-LGBT legislation drafted, also proposes of criminalization up to 5 years in prison for those that identify themselves as LGBT persons. There's the case as well in Zambia as well, where activists are being arrested for participating in peaceful protests against only gender-based violence. And something that I found these past weeks doing my research is about this community called the Radical Pentecostal Community. And this is a US-based sponsor that pays lobbyists around the world to push for these agendas. I think last year they spent over 26 million US dollars in East Africa alone to promote anti-homosexuality legislation. So you can see how this anti-gay rhetoric and agenda does affect the political discourse in other regions, and it's not just the US and Europe. And are we going to see this maybe even more if a Republican candidate with this kind of rhetoric gets in power in 2024? To be honest, I think it will. These type of discourses are not just there somehow. No, they're becoming the main settlers of the discussion. So if someone like that with that rhetoric gets into the highest office in the most powerful influencing country on earth, I think for sure we're going to see this trend even more often all over the world. But that's just my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's scary to think about it, but maybe we shouldn't just look to the US to think of the future policy in Europe, but we may also should take a look at Africa to look at Europe's future policy, because what is happening in Africa is just the more extreme versions of the policy proposals of far-right parties in Europe and the US. The same groups that may advocate for these policy changes in Africa, they may also be active in the US and in Europe as well. And if they have achieved one thing, then they may go more radical. So I think really varying developments, and we see how the whole world is interconnected in that regard. But the issue is also demographics. There's just not enough young people. Our society is overaged and they dominate politics. And of course, we see that the overaging society, of course, at some point mortality comes and those people will not matter in politics anymore. But at the moment and for the next few decades, young people will not perhaps take the leading role just because they do not have such a large share in the electorate. But the conclusion should not be that we should just dismiss our actions and say it's too hard, but to fight nevertheless, and fight even harder for the rights and equalities, because we are not talking about some minority issues here, but these are our basic principles of democracy, of human rights, the things we stand for internationally. And if we give in here, if we say, yeah, okay, we take a sideline here and focus on other issues, then we also kind of forget our true identity. And what are we if we are not we are not convinced about those very fundamental issues that have defined us since the end of World War II, and that have allowed that our societies are the wealthiest and the most free societies that perhaps ever lived on this planet.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think anyone should dictate how people should follow their lives in that sense. I mean, of course, there's general sidelines, but I think everyone should be able to decide who they want to love, who they want to be, what they want to do. Western Europe is one of the most, it's one of the best regions on earth to experience this. And I come from Latin America, where there's a lot of other social and civil limitations, and all of the rights that I enjoy here in when I used to live in Spain, now here in Belgium. I appreciate it so much. And when I see these attacks, this rhetoric up there, it worries me so much. Anyways, Armis, I think this was a really interesting episode. We talked about this phenomenon that we're seeing all over the world, as we just discussed. This doesn't only reflect US and Western politics. This is something that Global South countries such as Africa, as we've mentioned, such as Latin America, it's there as well. So it's something we should be concerned about. And I agree with you. I think young people should be pushing for what they believe, what we believe, because at the end, the world is gonna be kept for us. So we should at least try to push for the things that we believe in.
And I think what was beautiful about this episode is that we saw the interconnectedness of the world. One event taking place in one region of the world, and it may create a domino effect that affects us in Europe and so many other regions in the world. And we invited a member of Parliament of Austria, but we saw that what happens in Austria is just a fraction of a bigger development that we see globally. And it's so fascinating to address this kind of stuff. So really thankful for this episode. And thank you, dear listeners, for staying until the end. We wish you a good day, and make sure to subscribe to our channel.